everybody. Hey, only 5 more hours to work.
Where are you going?
Just stepping across the grass to see my girl.
George, put on your overshoes. It's raining torrents. You don't go out of this house without you're prepared for it.
But Ma, it's just a step.
George, you will catch your death of cold and come all through the service.
Don't you do what your mother tells you?
Tomorrow on, you can kill yourself in all weathers, but while you're in my house, you'll live wisely. Thank you. Maybe Mrs. Webb, as it used to call us at 7 in the morning. Here, take a cup of coffee first.
Oh, no, I'll be back in a minute. Good morning, Mrs. Webb.
George, well, you frightened me. George, will you come in a minute out of the wet? Well, you know I can't ask you in.
Why not?
Well, George, everybody knows. Well, you can't see the bride at the wedding until he sees her in church.
Oh, Mrs. Webb, that's just a superstition. Oh! Good morning, Mr. Webb.
Good morning, George.
I'm saying, hey, you don't believe in that superstition, do you?
There's a lot of common sense in some superstitions, George.
Millions of followers, George. You won't be the first to fly and face the custom.
So, how is Emily?
Well, she hasn't quite out yet. I haven't heard sound out of her.
Emily's asleep.
Well, no wonder. We were up all night, sewing and packing. George, I'll tell you what I'll do. Why don't you sit down here a minute with Mr. Webb, and you have this cup of coffee, and just I'll go upstairs and make sure she doesn't come down and surprise you. And there's some baking too, but don't be long about it.
Well, how are you, George?
Oh, fine. I'm fine. Say, Mr. Webb, what sense could there be in a superstition like that?
Well, you see, on her wedding morning, a girl's heads have to be full of clothes and one thing and another. Don't you think that's probably it, George?
Yeah, I never thought of it like that.
Girls have to be a mite nervous on her wedding day, George.
Yeah, well, I just wish a fella could get married without all that marching up and down.
Every man that's ever lived has felt that way about it, George. It's the women folk who built up marriage, my boy. All those good women standing shoulder to shoulder, making sure that the knot's tied in a mighty public way. A man looks pretty small at a wedding, George.
Right, but you believe in it, don't you, Mr. Webb?
Oh, yes, George. Don't misunderstand me. Marriage is a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing.
Right.
And don't you forget about that, George.
No, sir. Say, Mr. Webb, how old were you when you got married?
Oh, well, I've taken a little time to get settled and been away to college, but Mrs. Webb, she wasn't much older than Emily is now. Oh, age hasn't got much to do with it, George. Not compared to other things.
What were you going to say, Mr. Webb?
Oh, I don't know, George. Was I going to say something? George, I was thinking the other night of some advice my father gave me when I got married. Charles, he said, start out early showing who's boss.
Yeah.
Best thing to do is to give an order, even if it don't make sense. Just so she'll learn to obey, he said. And if anything about your wife irritates you, her conversation or anything, just get up and leave the house. And that'll make it clear to her, he said. And, oh, George, He said, never, never let your wife know how much money you have. Never.
Well, Mr. Webb, I don't think I could do that.
So I took the opposite advice of my father, and I've been happy ever since. And let that be a lesson to you, George, never to ask advice on personal matters. George, are you going to raise chickens on your farm?
What?
Are you going to raise chickens on your farm?
Oh. Well, Uncle Luke's never been much interested. No, but I thought we
A
could...
book came into my office the other day on the Fido system of raising chickens. I want you to read it. I'm going to start in a small way in the backyard, and I'm going to get a little incubator and have it in the basement. Then it's just a matter of time.
Charles Webb, are you talking about that old incubator again? I thought you two would be talking about things worthwhile.
Well, Merle, if you want to give the boy some good advice, I'll go upstairs and leave you alone with him.
Well, now, George, Emily has got to come downstairs and eat her breakfast. She said you're her love and she doesn't want to lay eyes on you. Goodbye, George.
Well,
George, goodbye.
bye.
Myrtle, you must have not heard that older superstition.
What do you mean, Charles?
Since the caveman, no bridegroom should see his father-in-law on the day of the wedding on him. Now remember that.
Thank you.